This is IBM Museum. I've got another NCR system on the bench behind me, but I've had a package come in, so it's going to preempt a video of going through and working with this system. I will flip it around and show the back as well. I'm not going to get in on the inside, but this is one of the systems that I also plan to go through and work with the Dallas module and configure it. I've been a little bit delayed from getting the diskette images created. I've been trying to work with an IBM Think Center system that I've got running Windows XP that has a diskette drive to it, 3.5 inch, to be able to generate those, but I'm having to go through and replace the fan, and the memory I've ordered for it has not come in quite yet, so that's kind of delaying it. But I'm going to actually take some diskettes home. I do have several here that I'll go through, and I'll make the diskette images for the two NCR systems. And this is another one that I don't have a diskette in the drive. Just like there's another couple of models that I do have a diskette paired with that system. Obviously, that reference diskette equivalent from NCR, and I'll have to make sure that those are up to date with the file stash that's been found covering those NCR models. But this is a 3220, so let me get off screen and kind of get moving this thing around, and then we'll move on to our topic of what I'm going to do for this short video. And I do apologize because I know that this headset is still a little bit tinny. It's the one that I have to use when my other headset, of course, lost the microphone capability from that static discharge. Here's the Dallas module I had the other day, and I was actually thinking more of this unit with this module when I've looked at it before than the 3421, I think, is the one that we had up the other day. And like I say, this is a 3220. It's one of the more slimline cases or lower cases. And it's a very nice system, actually, as it is. We'll get to seeing that when we go inside the unit later on. There is the back of the unit. Looks like I have it all centered up properly. That built-in planar SCSI again. Mouse and keyboard. It even has a little volume control there. And it's got integrated video on the system planar as well. And I think these are normally pretty good systems, and these might place for relative to be like a Bermuda-based Model 76 maybe with the microchannel slots. You can see that 3 spaces for microchannel adapters there, none of which are populated in this instance. But we'll get a closer instance look inside that as we go through. In that video, I'll go through and actually we'll do the configuration and everything else of these systems. So let me get set up for the SkyCam and kind of move on to the unboxing I'm going to do. And I'll just leave the NCR here so you guys know that I do intend to get back to it and get on to the likely for even the next video that's up. I do even have some other videos coming in, some other testing I have to do that I may go through in video on that. But I kind of wanted to go over the unboxing of that little thing. And I know it's I kind of knew what was coming in, and I started cutting into a little bit, and I'll have to see how he sealed the box. And this box came from Canada, where they also talk French, in parts there. I don't think he's from the French part, but I just started. I have not even opened this thing fully up. I don't want to show I didn't mask off the underside that's got addresses, and I think that's even the customs form. And I missed where I've had my little knife that I use, and again, I know the webcam is not all that grand for. Okay, get under that edge. This is old Asus motherboard box. Maybe wouldn't have been a bad for what was in there. But I know that there's a planar in here. I think just a planar. Yeah, not any. And that's great. That's actually what I expected. And I prepped a little bit for. And I don't have any static on me. You'd almost wear a band. Pull this out of this nice little wrapping. And let me see how that shows up. Although we can't really go for much better quality, not for what I want to kind of go over. And I grab my pointer. And this may look a little bit familiar. We've seen some of these before. And we've seen this before. And in particular, this riser gives it away a little bit more. But that is for the Model 25SX, and this is the L model. It has less RAM on it. It's got a megabyte of RAM. And then the one SIMM socket. The K model has 4 megabyte of RAM. These chips here are more populated, and it has actually some chips over here. But they never populate that other 72-pin SIMM socket. And of course, on the K model, it'd be hard because they have the chips there. And I've heard attempts made at putting in a SIMM socket here. Probably addressed that back in the day when I went over the 25SX planar. Well, let me set the riser off a little bit here. But as far as I've heard, that is unsuccessful. And I even had to get out my glasses. I think I know what speed the one I received is. About to check. And as I may have pointed out before with the 25SX planar, is that sometimes you get a CPU that's rated for 20 megahertz, but the crystal, the oscillator, still runs it at 16 megahertz. And IBM just advertised these as being for the being at 16 megahertz for the 386SX. And then on a few of them, you'll find with that 20 megahertz CPU, you'll find that it actually runs at 20 megahertz. It'll have a 40 megahertz crystal here instead of a 32 megahertz. And I've pictured all the different derivatives of that, all the variations you can find. You can find, a 16 megahertz crystal and 32 megahertz, a 16 megahertz CPU and a 32 megahertz crystal oscillator. You can find a 386SX 20 megahertz but clocked at that 16 megahertz from dividing the 32 megahertz crystal. Or you can find a 20 megahertz 386SX and 40 megahertz crystal. Now, on these as well, and that's nice. It's got the SVGA chip. It's got all the 4 RAM VRAM locations populated for 512 KB. So in a 25SX being built in with the built-in monitor, you get a little bit more color depth. You can get up to the 256 colors at 640 by 480 instead of just being limited to 16 megahertz. I got megahertz on the brain. Instead of 16 colors with only the 256 kilobyte of VRAM. And then on that video portion of that, as far as the this is the connector for the internal video of the MUL25, identical in all those units, be it the 8086 based, the 286 based, or this 386SX based. And then the back video connector is unpopulated. And again, that's another thing that the K submodels can do, is they'll put that back connector in there as well. So you get video out, and that's like the one that I had, the school suite. I did that demo on there, is I had an external video, so I'm able to extract video besides having it up on the internal screen and everything else as well. Able to show it on capturing the screen on my devices otherwise. Now for this planar here, as it goes through, and it's got the external connector, but it's got the internal connection removed. So meaning that this would be placed in a system that had, we got video outside the unit. You had the monitor outside the unit, not built-in display, not an all-in-one unit. And some of these pins are tweaked and everything else. That's not an issue. I can go through and straighten those out. But one of the nice things is it's got this second SIMM socket populated on this one. And it looks like it's got probably 2 megabyte soldered in here as well. And at least, chips being out of the way, because what it looks like is probably 1 megabyte, 2 megabyte. If these 2 chips were populated here, it'd be 3, and these chips here populated would be 4. So that's comprises up the K submodel having the 4 megabyte. The normal L submodel of the 25SX just having the 2 positions populated here for that 1 megabyte soldered on the planar. So indeed this one, and I had actually, back years ago, more than a dozen years ago, I actually put a 25SX planar into MUL 3286 case, and I kind of toyed around and advertised that, hey, I was going to go through and I was going to build a unreleased PS2 MUL that was based on the 386SX. In other words, a PS2 30SX model that that I didn't know that I didn't think IBM produced. And I kind of toyed around with it. I've gone through, and it's probably even this spare planar. And I had ideas going through and, at some point of populating that SIMM socket and kind of seeing if I could get things to work. But this is indeed a planar for what was intended to be the PS2 Model 30SX. And why have you never heard of that? It had a release planar and everything else. Because at the time that And I actually, it's been within this last year, probably even just several months ago, I stumbled across a BIOS listing of some of the PS2 models out there, and I did actually find a reference for a 30SX in that BIOS listing. And it matched so close to the 25SX that I knew I was on to, when I joked around before, I was on to the right concept here. And but it turns out this wasn't really put in a model. IBM had the Model 35SX and Model 40SX that were planned at this point, and those had 20 megahertz 386SX CPUs in them, and so they were in that bigger case, the style of the Model 56 and Model 57 cases, ISA based, but since there were plans for that and they were a little bit higher end of model, putting a planar like this in the Model 3286 case, just it wouldn't have sold. They would have had models that would win a little bit more faster that they were releasing at the same time. So they decided to keep it in a case for like the 3286, but they rebatch it as a PS1 for the home series. Since they they needed a model that was kind of that level at that time, just a place to kind of throw off the spare parts, as it were. And if you know anything about the IBM, if you follow them, they tend to go through and reuse parts and from older systems, and as they go through and build things, and they don't like an excess inventory of some stuff. Sometimes they go through and try and put them around, just to come up with some other systems like the XT286 that was followed the IBM AT, which is in the bigger case, but they got to use all those old XT cases and get rid of that surplus, so to speak. So that's what they did, and they called it the PS1 Pro, and it was the model was 2123, and we'd heard of it using the same video chip and everything, and that's why I kind of suspected a link as well. But finding that defined as that 30SX on the BIOS listing, and understanding that that was the BIOS that they had on the system, and I think this pretty much matches normally matches the 25SX BIOS anyway. I'll get a chance to read that, compare FRUs on that chip and everything else. Let me take a close-up look. I'll take it off camera, pick it up, and just to see in my glasses whether, and these chips are hard to read. Okay, so the 386SX 20 megahertz, and this has a 40 megahertz crystal. So this is ultimately a system that runs the 386SX at 20 megahertz. So it would have been the same level as that Model 35SX, Model 40SX for the planar features at least. And so other than that, I mean, you've also noticed that this does not have some of the VRAM field. I've got chips for this. It's easy to populate this to get it up to the 512 KB. And I don't know if we'll actually, encase this system. I don't have the riser that is 3 high on one side, instead of the same number of ISA slots, but, this is in that 2x1 format that the 25SX uses. And it does happen to have the, planar IDE, support for the 2.88 megabyte diskette drives, nice, coin cell battery replacement instead of like a Dallas module. So this would have taken the Model 30, had it, the evolution taken place into a nice place where it had a 386SX at that for that particular Model 30. But I'll likely go through and I'll stay a little bit more just to see what components may be placed for that. It's got little resistors and can compare between the two planars to where I can populate. We can look at populating the 72-pin SIMM socket on the board for the opportunity to get and add more RAM easily enough, because you typically get into a maximum capacity on the planar of 12 megabyte when it has the 4 megabyte soldered in, and then you've got an 8 megabyte SIMM in that socket. So this, having the ability to drop a 4 megabyte SIMM or something like that in there, just getting that memory amount up a little bit higher, and so very well worth it. And I thank Nikolai for sending that to me, and I really look forward to studying that a little bit further on some of the layout and other things here. But otherwise that's all the equivalent of a 25SX planar there. So let me get back on camera here. So if you enjoyed that little bit of a history lesson for what I've learned about the never produced model of the PS2 Model 30 SX, enjoy this content, go ahead and click on that like button, please, and consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and recommend it around. We kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent based on a package I received. I will go through and I will continue with the NCR systems and go through and we'll do a full configuration, look a little bit more detail on them, and even see there's got to be an installed operating system on them to go a little bit further. But that's coming up very soon, so watch it. I'm not able to make YouTube announcements till I hit 1,000 subscribers, so we've got to get there. I'm less than 1/10 of the way there so far. And that is all I have for now. This is IBM Museum. Thank you.